Welcome to Shiver, a podcast that tells real or imaginary horror stories. It's up to you, believe it.
The Kids of the Next Door, by Shiver. What you just said, son of a little children, and forbid them not to come unto me after a job-related relocation to Indianapolis. My family and I were given an allowance to rent a home in the city in order to give us some time to look for our forever home. That rental, the 100-year-old house. That was considered historic, and couldn't be gentrified. It was as charming in its own way, but it gave us a pretty good idea of what we did not want. It had some quirks, but we got used to them. But that's a story for another time. To sum it up though, that rental house was cold and damp and dark throughout, and it got pretty depressing at times. Indianapolis is like a gemstone in the middle of Indiana, albeit one whose clarity, cut, and color would never pass a jeweler's quality control measures. What I mean is that it's a bright and glaring concrete and glass island in the middle of what some consider flyover country, pretty much all farmland. Indy doesn't have much to offer in the way of suburbs. Its central business district is surrounded by pretty ugly industrial zone littered with slums and trailer parks, which gives way almost immediately to open fields. Having lived in big cities with all of our lives, my wife and I were ready for a change. Plus we wanted somewhere safe and with lots of space where our kids could grow up. We wanted them to have a swing set, a place to ride their bikes, not crowded sidewalks and busy streets right outside the door. We weren't having much luck though. Then we struck gold. We found a plot of land about 20 miles outside of downtown, agriculture land, and that was rezoned for residential. There was smack dab in the middle of wide open fields with a nice strand of trees at the rear of the property. As a bonus, the nearest neighbor was a horse farm about half a mile down the road, and it was a place that we could build our dream home. So we put down the money, found, and the architect and contractor commenced construction. The first snag during construction would become an omen of what was to come, but at the time we thought of it as just an inconvenience. Being an engineer myself, I was keeping a close eye on construction. I paid daily visits to the site and planned to watch everything from the groundbreaking until the final attack. Installed in the carpeting, the contractor had broken ground and was beginning excavation for the basement and footings. They were making good time until one fateful day. I showed up at the site after work to find the contractor's man had left and the equipment was gone, and there was large and obviously ancient metal tanks sitting in the ground of the edge of the hole. Oh. And I immediately called the foreman, and he told me about it while digging, and they had broken through a brick cistern about 15 feet under the grave. We almost lost a piece of the equipment down to 30-foot deep hole underneath. They had found the metal tank near the well and pulled it out. It would have to be inspected by the EPA to test for environmental hazards, and that would set them back about a week. He was more concerned, however, with how he was going to work around the deep hole. Filling it with soil would cause the setting problems later, and he certainly couldn't fill it with concrete. It would have raised the construction cost by tens of thousands of dollars. When I told my friends about the obstacle my contractor had stumbled upon, almost all of them joked, "Oh, what's next, an ancient Indian burial ground?" I had a sense of humor about it back then. She had come up with a plan to cast a reinforced concrete beam across the top of the old cistern and cast the house's footing across it, so I got the bonus of having the north wall of my home supported by a very deep footing. Not a bad deal. But even after moving in and living there for years, the thought of that big dark empty space lying beneath my basement floor, yeah. So he gave me the willies. There were no other hitches throughout the rest of the home's construction, save for the usual deviations from plans and wrong materials being delivered. No more big surprises, although they did pull up the occasional interesting brick or antique tool when doing earthwork around the yard. When complete, our new forever home was the complete antithesis of the rental we were moving out of. The floor plan was open and airy with plenty of life streaming in from the windows on every wall. A particular favorite spot for the whole family was a large all-glass sunroom at the back of the home. It was a beloved place to curl up on the couch and read during the winter, or sit and watch the children play during the summer. During the fall, we had a beautiful view of the woods and the changing colors of leaves. It was perfect for a while anyway. It was a few weeks after building a huge swing set/playhouse for our two boys that I first noticed the four children playing in our backyard, 2 boys and 2 girls. The oldest girl seemed to be in her early teens, and the youngest her brother. I assumed perhaps 5 or so and the same age as my youngest son. The boys were outfitted in coveralls and the girls were dressed in simple shifts. Their clothes reminded me of the Amish, and since the nearest neighbor was a horse farm, I naturally assumed the children belonged to the couple owning that place. Odd, we had met them briefly when moving into the new house, and they never mentioned having kids. You know, some people are funny that way, though I was happy to see the children. I had been thinking that my own kids were not going to have anyone to play with, no friends, and here were 4 children, who obviously lived quite close. They opened the back door and stepped out onto the deck. Hello there, guys. I no sooner got out the words and the kids reacted. They looked up at me seemingly startled, and then took off running. Wait, it's okay here, welcome to. I trailed off. I hope I didn't scare them. I found myself wishing that they would come back. Perhaps I would take a walk down to their parents' farm when I had the time, and let them know that the children are allowed to play in our yard, and we didn't mind. After a couple days I realized that it had slipped my mind, but it didn't matter, because the children were back playing on the swing set again. I figured that I should approach them more carefully this time. I put together a tray with a picture of Kool-Aid and some cookies, an international sign of goodwill among kids, and started out the back door. Once again, anyone up for some cookies? I called out, and it didn't work, though they caught a glimpse of me and took off through the trees again. I felt really bad for scaring them. I really needed to get over to that farm and talk to them once again, though I got busy with other things and the task went on the back burner, and I came up with a plan. Sure enough, the kids came back this time, though instead of going outside myself, I sent my own 2 boys, then 5 and 7, as ambassadors. My strategy worked. The children were a bit weary at first, but soon warmed up to my boys. After a while I called the boys in and sent some drinks and snacks out. Then once I had seen what all the kids had, I took something. I went outside. This time the children didn't run away. The older girl spoke up. "Please forgive us, sir. We didn't mean to play here without your permission." "Nonsense," I replied. "You all can come over whenever you feel like it, whether my boys are out or not. We're neighbors." I received a chorus of thank yous from the children. "Well, I'll leave you to it. Once again, I'm happy that you kids are around. I'm sure that my boys will enjoy your company." My boys did enjoy their company over the following weeks, and they had all become best friends. My boys began asking if they could go to the children's farm to play, and I hesitated at first because of their ages, but soon relented. The children seemed so nice and polite after all, and the oldest girl was what my wife and I thought of as babysitting age, so I figured that they were safe with her. My boys arrived home with 30 clothes dirtier than usual, and I asked them what they've been up to. "Nothing," was the usual reply, but this time my older son, who was 8 years old, seemed really excited. "We are checking out the cemetery, Dad." Boy, that came as a shock to me. It was my impression that there was nothing around us at the cemetery. "The one in the woods," said my boy, and the other kid showed us well that I had to see for myself. I had been a kid once too, though I barely remembered it. I did recall making up places. An old boathouse became a fort for my younger self. A fishing pond seemed like an ocean, and the kids probably found some interesting looking rocks and imagined they were tombstones. Still, I asked if they could show me. My younger son was tired and went directly upstairs to take a bath, but my older one, still full of energy, was eager to go. "It's getting dark, Dad. We better get there while we can still see." He led me off in the woods at the back of our property. Needless to say, I was shocked by what I saw. Well, I'll be damned, Hamilton, myself. There was a farm back there in the woods, and a small one, yes, but a farm nonetheless. It was in decrepit condition and no longer inhabited. No house left, but there was a small barn half falling down, and the corral that looked like it once held sheep or goats, and a large load structure. Another barn, but perhaps for small animals or chickens. There was an old truck back there, not a truck like you normally picture, but a panel truck on wagon wheels, the type that would have been drawn by a horse, and right there in the center of it a cemetery that won't be damned. I repeated. There were 5 tombstones visible, 2 large ones and 3 smaller ones, the smallest measuring about 1 foot square in the center of these, and toppled over by a tree that had grown practically around. It was a large prism-shaped monument with a roughly chiseled sphere on the top that had some names chiseled on it. Baden was in the largest letters, probably the family name. Still in a state of surprise, I quickly looked over the smaller stones, and they were dated from the early 1900s. Doing some quick math, I introduced that the inhabitants of the grave ranged in ages from less than a year old to 38. Oh, I'd never seen it before. I had hiked a short way into the woods before, but somehow missed this farm. Granted, the barn, the tallest structure, was weathered in its planks that turned grey to match the surrounding cedars, but still it only sat 25 yards from the edge of the woods. Once I knew it was there, it became obvious. I looked out at it from my bedroom window every morning. This definitely deserved looking into. I dug into everything I could find on the internet and at the local library. It seemed that these pioneer cemeteries dotted central Indiana. A quick search turned up at least 3 more within a couple miles from my house. The Baden Cemetery, my cemetery, however, was not listed among them. The long and short of it was this: during the late 19th century, pioneers were crossing the Midwest on their way to America's west coast. Many of them found sufficient places along the way and decided to settle in those spots. They would build their tiny homesteads and usually live out their lives there. Many of the older families still remain. The reason for the concentration of these homesteads and cemeteries around our area was proximity to what would come Route 40. One of the first major travel ways across the United States. Unfortunately for many of the budding families, the great influenza epidemic of 1918 struck. Dense populations fell quickly because the communal wells and sanitary facilities, even the outlying farms, fell victim because of the shared groundwater or a family member that picked up the bug on a visit to town. Most of these smaller homesteads fell into disrepair in their farms, and deceased were absorbed back into the wilderness as the old family cemeteries were discovered. They were usually cleaned up out of respect for the dead, and there were vast monuments and societies dedicated to restoring the tombstones and their grave sites, as well as compiling records of those who were buried there. And one of my almost daily visits to the cemetery, I verified that the residents had indeed all died in or about 1819, victims of the flu. Sure enough, once all of my sources of information were exhausted, I contacted the local historical society. I told the representative about the cemetery and expressed my interest in helping to clean it up and get it recorded into the historical register. They were excited and sent someone out literally within hours to look at it. Her name was Jody, I believe, Jody, and I walked down to the woods. She asked all types of questions and told me a little about the history of the area, most of which I had already discovered on my own. She did point out a couple of interesting things, though. She had brought a long piece of rebar and began walking around poking it into the ground. Yep, just as I suspected, she said. There are more graves. She explained that because the grave markers were small and were not supported on concrete pads, as they typically are now, they tend to sink into the ground. She estimated that there may have been up to 25 people buried out there. The other tidbit she let me in on was a little disconcerting. If you find any bones, let me know immediately. What bones? She went on to explain that although most of the wooden coffins tended to rot away over time, foxes would sometimes pull up metal hinges, jewelry, bits of clothing, or even bones. After everything I had been through in my life, I was not squirmish. Still, this revelation sat ill with me throughout all of this. The thought of the neighbors' children had taken a back burner. They were the ones who were really responsible for the discovery. Perhaps they knew more. I would definitely need to talk to them. I told Jody about them, and she expressed an interest in meeting them. Also, while she had me on the phone, she asked if she could email some documents that she had found regarding my neighbors, and as she had taken to calling them of the family who were most likely occupying the graves out there behind me. I remember joking that they were the perfect neighbors, always quiet and never asking to borrow my lawnmower, while the Baden family were the final owners of the farm. Jody found out that they had married into the family of the original owners, the Buckshot family. Turned out that the Buckshot boys were grave robbers by trade, the not so nice kind, who opened up recently filled graves to steal jewelry and valuables. They had gotten in trouble for it a number of times. Ironic, since we would most likely now be digging up some of their graves, only we wouldn't be stealing anything, just restoring and preserving them for history. And out of respect, the neighbor kids hadn't been around in a while, so Jody never got the chance to talk to them. After a bit of research on her part, she found an heir to the Silver property, one who didn't even realize that his family had owned land in the area, and they had made arrangements for him to come and began clearing the area with assistance of volunteers from the local Pioneer Cemetery Restoration Society. They did find quite a bit of number of bones at the back of the farm, but determined That was the location where the farmers had slaughtered hogs and dumped their carcasses. The workers had not come across any human remains yet. My interest in the project did not wane, in fact it intensified. I began visiting other cemeteries and museums. The Indiana State Museum had a large exhibit dedicated to relics of the early 20th century, with a section devoted to burial practices, which were a fact of life, a big part of life given the harsh conditions that early settlers had to face. When it started to become creepy for me, and I was fascinated by some of the vestiges of the time, the museum curators had on display fancy burial clothes, photos of the dead in their coffin, not common practice, apparently ringlets woven of hair from the deceased as remembrances, and most disconcerting small caskets, child-sized coffins, that really hit home. Being a father of 2 young boys, I was disturbed by the thought of a parent having to bury their fledgling child. Then I saw it, the thing that would haunt my dreams, a child-sized casket, with a window set into it, a window that would display the child's face and upper body. There were photos of such coffins, with their occupants displayed next to it. All that went through my mind was, why the hell would someone ever do that? That's so freaking disturbing. People back in the old days were certainly a different breed. I left the museum immediately, and literally could not even eat the rest of the day. From that point on, I lost interest in the work going on in the woods behind my house. Honestly, I didn't lose interest so much as avoided it. I dreaded the thought of the workers on, I think, one of the small caskets that were undoubtedly out there given the ages showed on the grave markers. Were still, what if one of them had a glass pane in it? I couldn't handle seeing that. No way. I did my best to forget about the whole mess. After avoiding a few of Jodi's calls, she must have finally gotten the message and stopped bothering me. I warned my boys not to go near the cemetery, even if the neighbor kids urged them to go play out there, not wanting to scare them. I explained it away with an excuse that the barn was old and dangerous, ready to collapse at any minute, and that the volunteers working out there didn't want to be disturbed. Ironically, a big discovery came on Halloween Day 2012. Jodi thought it was a big enough event that she skipped calling and just came knocking on my door. They had begun working near the graves, raising sunken markers, and had inadvertently pulled up an entire child's casket, one of those swords with the glass window. The glass had been shattered, of course, but Jodi said that the remains were in remarkable condition. She asked if I wanted to come out and take a look. I told her that I was simply not interested anymore and slammed the door before she had another chance to speak. I warned the boys again that they were not to go play in the woods, especially after the discovery. My worry was doubled because of the holiday. As I said, it was Halloween. What better way for kids to celebrate than by visiting a spooky graveyard and telling ghost stories? The afternoon faded, dusk came, and darkness soon followed. Even moonlight could not filter through the overcast night sky. Around 9 o'clock, I heard banging on the back door, and trick-or-treaters. Not in our neighborhood, it was too far out of the way. Not enough houses. Didn't make economic sense for true candy hunting aficionados. I went to the door and looked out. It was the neighbor kids, only 3 of them. They seemed to have left the youngest boy at home. Relieved, I opened the door and apologized. Sorry kids, I didn't think that we'd be getting trick-or-treaters tonight. I guess I didn't plan ahead. I chuckled. But I'll catch you next time. Okay. One by one their faces changed to outrage, pure hatred, and the politeness they had always exhibited disappeared entirely. Blast you cussed old boat liquor, said the older of the 2 brothers. Off you, Nancy. Boy prick, said the younger girl, and explicitly appalling given her age. The oldest girl finally said, let's leave this blue nose to the devil, and the children ran off into the woods. Damn it all, what the hell had gotten into them? Just because I didn't have candy. I was so angry I paced for half an hour. My boys are still awake, had come down to see what was going on. You're never playing with those damn kids again, I threatened. But in reality, I thought at least not until I get an apology and an explanation. I gave my boys a lecture on politeness and sent them off to bed. I sat down on my favorite chair and flicked on the TV. Due to the complete blackness outside, I didn't see them approach the house. But I was startled when all 3 children slammed their hands against the great window along the back of the house, sticking their tongues out at me. They chanted in unison. They ran off. But it wasn't long before they returned, hanging on the windows all together. Scared the crap out of me. And again they were chanting, this time a more detailed and descriptive song. This continued most of the night long. After normal kids should be asleep in their beds, I would definitely be visiting their parents the next day. First thing in the morning we were already in bed, when I heard the glass break. One of them had thrown a rock at the window downstairs, and it had shattered the pane. I ran down the steps and threw open the back door. A lot of deeds is like a garden full of weeds, and when the weeds begin to grow it's like a garden full of snow, and when the snow begins to fall it's like a bird upon the wall, and when the bird always fly it's like an eagle in the sky. From when the sky begins to roar like a lion at the door, and when the door began to crack it's like a stick of crushed in the back, and when you're back we can just relax. You're dead. You're dead indeed. Again they ran off. I decided that I wasn't going to play around anymore. I knew that they were only children, but I grabbed the baseball bat from a bin in my garage and took up a post on the steps of my deck in the backyard. Let's just see them come back again, I thought. The next time, it was only the teenage girl who came back out of the woods. She approached me cautiously, her head lowered, not looking me in the eyes. "We're sorry, sir," she said softly. "We're just so angry. They took our brother." "What?" I wrinkled my brow. "Who took your brother?" "Why, the bad people. They came to our farm and took our brother away." An anxious feeling began creeping into me. I felt to shiver up my spine. "Where are your parents?" "Dead, sir," she replied matter-of-factly. "Hold on now." I was not where. I panic. Was this a prank? What if it wasn't? Not to be made a fool if I wasn't about to call the police just yet. I told the girl to wait at the house while I jumped in my car and sped down the road to the neighbor's farm. The lights are on in the house, and I could see someone moving inside, so I approached the front door, and after I felt sure that I was safe, I screwed up my courage and knocked. The owner of the farm answered. "Oh, thank God you're okay." I breathed with a sigh's relief, then anger returned tenfold. "Do you know what your damn kids have been up to?" She looked at me as if I was a lunatic. "What are you talking about? We don't have any kids."
Thank you so much for listening. And if you liked this story, subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and see you next story.